All right. So we're in here. I'm gonna let the video upload right quick. Okay, so I'm Shock Exchange. I'm here with Mr. Mitchell, of course, and this is Trump and the GE. Daniel Penny, Subway Superman, which is what they're calling this guy. We'll see if he's really a Superman or something else. But as everybody's aware, this the sort of public killing of I guess it's a killing. We'll see if this guy gets exonerated or not. The public killing of Jordan Neely has been dominated 24-hour news cycle. It's another one of those situations like George Floyd or Walter Scott out of South Carolina where someone was murdered publicly and everybody watches it, almost like a snuff film. So that's the title of the show. But we'll start with the economy. And I mean, it's hard for me to talk about the economy's vital signs, especially after the pandemic. I don't think we're still getting over the pandemic and all of the stimulus and all the quantitative easing. A lot of government actions behind the scenes, whether it's quantitative easing and now quantitative tightening, until the government actions sort of flow through the system, it's really hard to tell what the true output of the economy is. And I've been saying this for a decade. I'm not sure we're going to find out anytime soon because now people are calling for the Federal Reserve to halt rate hikes. They may even cut at some point. But anyway, banks are failing because of a lot of these banks have these the same issues that the savings and loans had back in the 80s, where they have these low interest rate mortgages and now rates are rising, so their cost of capital is rising above the price of their loans. So a lot of their loans are underwater, and now that the economy sort of hit a line of demarcation, that you have commercial real estate could be the next shoe to drop. So I think we're going to be dealing with a lot of these potential bank failures, and the government trying to react to those. I think that's going to control the narrative for the next few months. And then, like we said on this podcast in the past, we can talk to a grinning face about the economy's vital signs. Nobody really cares until it hits Main Street. Consumers don't care until they experience it, and they seem to be experiencing it now with wages falling, but prices are going up. Not just prices for housing or student loans, but also for gasoline, price of food continues to go up. And that's going to be something that could sink Joe Biden if he can't improve the economy. That may be his downfall, and I don't know what he can do in such a short period of time. You know what I mean? The economy is what it is, and it takes a long time to right the ship, and now you hear consumers complaining about it. So I think that's going to be something that's going to be on the minds of the Democrats and the Republicans as the presidential election years. But in the meantime, I think the economy is going to remain stagnant. Right now, everybody's talking about the debt ceiling. That's going to be resolved. They're going to come to a deal. But once the debt ceiling is done, the debt ceiling deal is done, I think the focus is going to be on like falling wages and rising prices. So the stagflation that we really don't normally see. I know it happened during the Nixon administration. It also happened during the Carter administration when unemployment was going up and oil prices were going up because OPEC was messing with the oil prices. But I think that's sort of my take on the economy for a 20,000 foot level. Now you're going to hear, I think, consumers taking over and talking about the economy. I think you're going to hear a lot more from Main Street and less from economists in Wall Street. The other thing is that, again, Walmart and Target are still complaining about a lot of the theft that's going on in these stores in the city. So a lot of them are just having a hard time. They're struggling with making money at these retail stores in urban areas. So that used to be a big plus for a retailer to have a footprint in an urban area and a densely populated area. Now a lot of them are leaving, and now a lot of them are closing stores because they're having trouble making money because of all the theft and the fraud and so on and so forth. So I think that would be the other thing, other than stagflation or rising costs. Also, how retailers may be struggling with dealing with theft in urban areas.
Yeah, I think that that latter point really strikes. I think the biggest chord, even I think even larger than the debt ceiling for most folks. We kind of go through this soap opera type drama every few years with the debt ceiling, and there's always a high degree of confidence that beyond the theatrics that we're going to get a deal across the finish line. The U.S. has never defaulted on its debts technically. I think with the exception of Nixon, it could be considered a technical default. We went from gold to fiat, but outside of that, there have been, I think, some concerning sentiment amongst the Republican Party that has shown, I think, a higher degree than normal of pushback. That there are some Republicans that seemingly would like to see a default, would like to see kind of a reset button hit as a true course correct for the country and for the overall economy. Understanding that there's going to be some short to mid term severe pain. Quite often those at the bottom are not necessarily considered as far as what those implications are going to be, but we talk about that I think pretty much on a monthly basis. Black folks just are not considered in those conversations until it's time to vote. But more to that point, the thing that I think most folks can really feel more tangibly is the retail point that you made. One of the things that we're seeing, just going more broadly speaking, is commercial real estate defaults on the rise. Larger cities, New York, LA, Miami, San Fran, we're seeing, rise of crime, coupled with the fact that remote workers, or not even remote workers, but folks that just haven't returned back to in-person work. And there's a strong pushback from, I think, the majority of laborers that can complete their job at home. They don't need to be in a physical office space. And I think it really goes to the point that what are companies, what are developers to do with all of this now excess real estate? Does it make sense for a company to be paying $200,000 a month in a lease when you only have 30% of the workforce showing up, because 80% of the work itself can be done anywhere in the world? So what has that led to? A significant decline in commercial real estate valuations. That also aids in crippling retailers because what does that mean? That there's less money coming into the household. Retailers are right at the heart of the intersection of this pandemic, lower wages. Now we're facing very real reskilling due to AI. We've already seen IBM, Facebook, or Meta, Google lay off tens of thousands of workers just in the last few months alone, due to the reliance on AI. So what does that mean for the tens of thousands and what soon to be at this pace potentially hundreds of thousands of folks that will be out of a job and will now be scrambling to find either an equivalent or at least something that's going to keep the lights on, keep food on the table? Well, that pinches right into discretionary spending, household spending. One of the things that hasn't really been highlighted is we've reached a point where a significant amount, I think it's 30 or yeah, I believe it's 30% of uh, of household groceries are being put on a credit card. That's something that one we just haven't seen in the U.S. because in the grand scheme of things, household credit is still a newer phenomenon. Um, you know, credit bureaus have only been around since what, the late 80s, 88, 89. So the idea of a personal consumption through a personal credit card is still kind of a newer phenomenon in mass, right? So if the majority of folks are already being pushed to such a brink of putting daily groceries on a credit card, who's right at the heart of that? Well, it's retailers. Uh, so I think that out of all of the kind of high level discussions when it comes to the economy and the future of the economy and the intersection of politics and a lot of the things that we talk about, I think what becomes the most visceral, the most tangible thing is that point, retailers, because people see that in their neighborhoods. They see that in their grocery stores every single day. Um, it's smack in front of you the amount of retailers that are closing up shop. Nike, Target, Wegmans, so many, grocery stores across the country are having to, limit inventory and supplies or just shut down altogether. Smaller, retailers, cities like New York, where, we have corner stores and bodegas and little 99-cent stores. And so these are largely mom and pop stores that are not chains, they're not large corporations. Um, they are feeling it as well because it forces them to then shoot up their prices because their inventory is rising, although the inventory isn't leaving the shelves as fast. But the cost of that inventory is increased, and who's going to take the brunt of that cost? Well, the individual. All right, so I think that is really at the heart and gives kind of the clearest indication of what this economy is truly carving out to be. Whether we default or we don't default, um, it's really, and I think I said it a few days ago. It's really, do you want to have a fast loss or do you want to lose slowly? Because either scenario is loss. We raise the debt ceiling. It buys us a little bit more time to slowly take off the band-aid. You know, we let the debt ceiling fall through. We default on debt. Well, we rip off the band-aid more quickly. Depending on what side of the fence you stand on will determine which scenario is more conducive to your future. Um, there's no easy answer there. But I think that is really at the heart of what folks can look forward to over the really next year, uh, to 18 months.
Okay, thank you for that. A couple of things about the retail thing is that you've seen these videos of people just sort of running into stores and just like you see like mostly black folks always like 20 people just run into a store and just run out real quick with stuff and nobody seems to even be trying to catch them. Seems like retailers are just sort of throwing up their hands. They're like already resigned to the fact that the economy is sort of uneven. That after the financial crisis, when you print money and give it to a certain segment of society, why would anybody think there will be an outcome other than what we're seeing? when certain individuals or consumers haven't necessarily enjoyed in this so-called economic boom since the financial crisis, and so you don't see hedge fund managers out there, private equity firms out there rating retailers because they're flush with cash. So why would anybody expect this scenario not to play out? The other thing is that what's held the economy up has always been the consumer, which I was always curious when the consumer would actually break. Consumer spending about, I guess, about 2/3 of the economy. When consumer spending goes, that's it. That's pretty much it. And the other narrative is that so when you hear this sort of online phenomenon, this digital world we live in, has hit retailers hard because retailers like Best Buy, Bed Bath & Beyond have had to react to the Amazons of the world where more people are buying online. Now you have real estate developers, a commercial real estate has to rely on this sort of digital world where people are working from home. But we see a lot of politicians lobbying, like you see the mayor of New York, lobbying Wall Street or lobbying firms to make their employees come back to work or come back to the office. You kind of see who controls the politicians. So, but so apparently people have been listening to it. There's a guy by the name of Byron Downs, a congressman out of Florida, who's pretty very articulate on high level issues. He's like almost like the Republican version of Barack Obama. He's everywhere. He's always in the media. I'm going to play a clip of him responding to Trump's town hall. Where he's talking to people on CNN and trying to shed light on what individuals are really talking about, and not engage in a lot of this happy talk coming from these people, these talking heads at CNN who live in a vacuum. So here goes.
Even if you listen to the last segment with Jake, everything that was just talked about is not on the minds of independent voters in America. They are focused on the things that are affecting their families, first and foremost. As my child actually caught up from being locked out of schools for 2 years, is fentanyl, which is a major issue in so many communities around our country. Is the president going to do the job of securing our border and stopping cartels from having operational control of our southern border? Are we going to maintain the dollar as the world's reserve currency while China's trying to negotiate around the United States? Inflation, yes, the year-over-year number is trending down, but the impact of inflation on the American family has completely devalued their wages over the last 2 years. Those are the things that really matter to Americans, even if you listen to the last segment with Jay.
Okay, so he pretty much showed summed up a lot of our show. Pretty succinctly, you're talking about inflation, which we're talking about, which consumers are now talking about. The regular American citizens are talking about inflation, gas prices, food, so on and so forth. Fentanyl, we talked about the so-called opiate crisis. Why should there be a fentanyl issue or opiate crisis after the state AGs are basically down there bankrupt a lot of these opiate manufacturers and cut their opiate supply dramatically? Why should there still be a drug problem? So we talked about that specifically. Rose Byron Donald, who were having these shows about how, just necessarily, taxing the daylights out of drug manufacturers or opiate manufacturers or cutting supply is not going to stop people from taking drugs. It's not going to stop the drug problem in this country. It's only going to get worse as the economy turns down. Then he talked about the dollar. That's where I know he's been watching Trump and the G. Because I don't think consumers are talking about the dollar. I don't think individuals are talking about maintaining the dollar as a fiat currency or fighting off attacks against the dollar from these BRIC countries or whomever. That's how I know he's been watching Trump and the G. No, you can't tell me some individual talking about worried about the dollar. But the other stuff, I think he's kind of summed up what we've been talking about for a while.
No, I appreciate his candor. One of the things that I always find important is that that we bring these conversations into a regular household. It's so easy to get caught up in some of these concepts, and while they can be fun, but a lot of it ends up being kind of an intellectual circle jerk. And just kind of a measuring contest Who knows the biggest words and who has the more historical framing of some of these economic ideas and socio-political landscape and et cetera, et cetera. And meanwhile, the average listener has been completely overlooked and forgotten. What does this mean for, a married household or a two-parent household with children that, collectively is bringing in less than 100K a year and needs 105K a year just to break even? And, okay, great. You can, quote some Adam Smith and, dazzle in, some long forgotten vice president from 4 decades ago whose policy impacted something. But what does that mean when it comes to folks having the ability to, safely send their children to school without having to worry about, is that going to be the last hug and kiss that they may give their children? Without having to, pinch the literal cents and change in the couch to try to make sure that they have enough to eat for that week, and, keeping fingers crossed that no emergency really hits them where, they need to shell out $1,000 or more at a time. So, I appreciate his ability to kind of refocus that conversation, because most, as you look at the panel there at CNN, the majority of those folks are removed just from income bracket alone, just from the access to the rooms that they have and the people that they have access to. They are removed even if they come from humble beginnings. Something that actually somebody said recently, and I forget, I think it was on social media, and I said they really made a good point, that, and they were talking about rappers, and they were using a couple of rappers, Jay-Z, Nas, etc., as an example of they've been rich longer than they've been poor. They now are in their 40s and 50s, and they've been rich since their 20s, and in some cases been rich since their late teens. And when you think about the disconnect, in other words, between the image that they portray in their music that's been so far gone, but we still think of them as the corner boys and the hustlers in the street, which has been the image that their music continues to portray decades later. And it's like, wait a minute, they aren't actually. They've been, living in a completely different zip code, have different access than you. They're not, going home to pissy hallways and fifth floor and 10th floor walk-ups anymore, because the elevator is broken down for 2 years, and they're not dealing with the same circumstances, in other words, that got them there, right? And I think it's easy to forget that a lot of these pundits that are handsomely paid, etc., are very far removed from the households that these shows are in. They shoot for middle America. They shoot for the middle class. And yet, you're not talking to folks that are considering the middle class, frankly, and what is real world impact.
Right. They didn't. I didn't show the entire episode, but it looked like a lot of push pull between Anderson Cooper and the people on the panel and Byron Donalds, and it looked like CNN is struggling. They're trying to control the narrative. If they get on TV and repeat something over and over and over again, that's the news. Where Byron Donald brought them down to reality, and CNN kept trying to tell the public what's important. What was important about the town hall, about something Trump said, and back and forth with him and Caitlin Collins, and just this sort of new verdict came down about him not sexually assaulting, but I guess sexual battery, and this lady E. Jean Carroll. CNN was trying to frame it that was newsworthy. That's the news. And I think the corporate media is struggling with trying to tell the public what's important now. Where you have shows like Trump and the GE, other podcasts, bloggers who can tell can really show what's really on the public's mind. And I think that was that didn't show in the clip, but it shows CNN. I think the corporate media is struggling with trying to control the narrative and telling the public what's important. So I'm going to pivot to the Subway Superman and Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely. Jordan Neely has dominated the 24-hour news cycle over the past couple of weeks. He was a well-known dancer, street performer, and they have a lot of those in New York, especially around Times Square and on the subway. And if you're a tourist, I've gotten used to it, but if you're a tourist, it's something you expect to see when you come to New York. People dancing on the subways, people singing on the subways. There's a guy, the cowboy in Times Square, the guy, about 6'5", 200, he's chiseled, like 6'5", 250 pounds, plays that guitar, then number of cowboy boots and an underwear, white.
Yeah.
Right.
Guitar cowboy.
Right. Those are like, you see stuff like that all the time, but Jordan Neely was probably pretty well known. He's been dancing since he was like 16. He does a Michael Jackson impersonation on the streets and on the subway. AOC knew who he was. Several politicians knew who he was, which I was surprised by. He's actually around my son's age. I think he started dancing around the financial crisis. He was around 16 years old. And the one thing I noticed about the scenario, the scene of him being choked by Daniel Penny, was that Daniel Penny looked chiseled, especially when he was put in handcuffs by the police. He looked more chiseled than the police did. He had a rear naked choke on this kid. He had his legs wrapped around him, so he constricted his body so he couldn't really move. And there were some bystanders who were holding his arms, so he couldn't pull down Daniel Penny's arms. So he couldn't get Daniel Penny's arms from around his neck. You know what I'm saying? So that's like a death hold. You know what I'm saying? The thing about New York, I always say that people in New York are mostly predators. That it's never going to be a fair fight with anybody in New York. Someone was aggressive with you in New York, usually because they know something you don't. They have a gun and you don't. They have a knife and you don't. Or it's 5 or 6 of them and only one of you. And that didn't look like a fair fight just from the optics of it. You're basically almost like looking at a snuff film with this guy. Same thing with Walter Scott out of South Carolina from a few years ago, and George Floyd. You're probably looking at a snuff film, which is triggering people, but we've kind of become jaded so much. We've seen so many of these, almost like we're becoming jaded. But that looked like a snuff film to me. So that was my first reaction, just looking at the video and looking at the picture.
Yeah, I mean, it actually took me a couple days before watching the video. You kind of hit on a point. We've seen so much right on our screens, right? And I think this is very different than any other time in history. For those of us that were raised during the heroin and crack era, where it was nothing, it was pretty much a norm to see folks strung out, see dead bodies, see folks shot, see folks killed, and the rampant violence that was happening. Even in spite of that, in other words, I think that it's still, to get to a point where, on a daily basis, every other day, there is death on our screens. And frankly, I actually never want to get to a point. Like, I'm okay with never getting to a point that I'm eager to see death. And especially somebody that looks like me, that could easily be a cousin of mine, a family member of mine, an uncle of mine, certainly a child of mine. I never want to get to that point where it doesn't impact me is kind of my, I guess my signifier that there's some shred of humanity left inside of me. Um, so I was not eager to actually look at the film, truth be told, or the video. Took a couple days, and I'm just gonna call it what it is. It's just flat out murder. I frankly don't give a rat's what the jury thinks, what the jury says, if it defines within the limited parameters of the law. This man was able to, whether intentionally or unintentionally, um, certain sectors of the political landscape have decided to, uh, make this man a hero. And as a result, much like Zimmerman, we've seen this story before where a white man has taken a black man's life and is now facing judicial consequences, and there has been an outpouring of financial support. I think this gentleman raised a little over $1 million in less than 48 hours. I'm not sure if he even solicited for that. I get the sense that it was just simply raised on his behalf. Um, so we've seen this story before, and irrespective of the lawyers and the legal prowess that cash will be able to buy him, we just watched murder. I'm gonna just call it what it is, and I don't care who agrees or disagrees, who likes it, doesn't like it, whatever legalese that folks want to use and say, but, because it'll be a technicality, it'll be a but until you bring up OJ, and then all of a sudden, oh, well, the judicial system doesn't work. All of a sudden, the same arguments that they're going to use in defense of Daniel Penny murdering Jordan Neely, all of a sudden there's going to be a heel turn, and those same arguments are going to get tossed out of the window. So as far as I'm concerned, veteran or not, fellow Marine or not, this is a murder. Point blank, period. And those that participated by, holding his hands, like keeping him from essentially defending himself, they were accomplices in his murder. Whether one ever engages in MMA or any type of combat training or sport, to have somebody in a rear naked chokehold for even 3 minutes, let alone 15 minutes. It's the reason why boxing matches only go 3 minutes at a clip. Reason why MMA and UFC matches only go for 5 minutes at a clip. And rarely are you going to watch two fighters, one fighter has another fighter in a rear naked chokehold for the entirety of those 5 minutes.
Yeah, and UFC you can tap out too. You can tap.
Exactly. You're able to tap. The whole point in the combat sport of it is to get your opponent to tap. And the only other result other than that tap that one can be looking for is to get a person to pass out. Anything longer than those two outcomes, you are seeking an intention of death. You are well aware of what this move does. It's no way that you have the temerity, even if your adrenaline is pumping as the murderer, that's holding someone down. Just the physicality of what it takes to hold somebody in a pinned position for that amount of time. Like there is intention, like even if it didn't start with that intention, at some point it crosses the threshold of negligence. And now there is intention. Your body, the lactic acid that is building up, and I'm certainly not a physician, but I've been in the ring a few times. I've been on the mat a few times, long, at least enough times to know what is going on in the human body. When someone is fighting, your adrenaline is pumping, lactic acid is building up, and it's a race against the clock before your body gets to a point of depleting your energy, depleting the ATP, using up the energy sources. And to have the endurance to hold someone down, your mind and body is targeting a particular outcome, in other words. There's no way you reach that long. You don't go beyond three, most fights, the majority of fights, 30 seconds, maybe a minute. You know, with folks that are not professional fighters, you know what I mean? Fights aren't going for professional boxing, 3 minutes, 3 minutes around. So if professionals that have been fighting for a decade, 2 decades, are still limited to 3 minutes, that tells you the limitation of the body, in other words, to reach a point where even a fighter's, something is going off in his brain, like, hey, you know, we're using up a lot of energy here. We're tiring out here. You know, what's the goal here? What are we doing here? And,
He had to have felt Jordan Neely's body, go limp as well. He could, he had
exactly.
to, have felt that.
You feel that this person is no longer fighting back. Even if your adrenaline is pumping, you are in a moment where, is just like a fighter getting in the ring for the first time, right? First fight, you get those butterflies and jitters, and oh my God, okay, here it is, right? And it's just you're a ball of tension and excitement, and I'll give a person that pass, but at some point, you know what I mean? We move past that excitement, and now the body has calmed down to a baseline, and you're still going.
Yeah, but that's never. I've never seen the video. I may have seen like maybe 10 seconds of it. I never watched much of it. But I've never seen any indication. Maybe the police officers have. I mean, I'm sure the police department has the entire video, but I never seen any indication that he was ever a threat to Daniel Penny. From what I understand, that Daniel Penny walked up behind him and grabbed him. Maybe he was shouting at people in the subway, or maybe intimating he was going to threaten somebody, but I don't know who he actually put his hands on. They're saying he's been arrested over 40 times, stuff like jumping turnstiles or whatever, but there's also say he's actually punched a few people, but in that incident, it doesn't really say where he was a threat to anybody. And from what I understand, Daniel Penny walked up behind him and grabbed him from behind. So that, I think that would be, a lot of this is playing on the media, but ultimately what the jury's going to go on are the facts. And he actually broke his silence. He spoke to the New York Post recently. Said like a lot of silly stuff about I'm not racist and so on and so forth. But I didn't really see anything where he intimated that that Jordan Neely was a threat to him. Like I said, definitely wasn't a fair fight. Jordan Penny looked like he probably weighed 50 pounds soaking wet. But I'm surprised. This is where I'm surprised by it. The Republican, this guy's raised almost $3 million already, and the Republicans are rallying around this guy for some reason. I think it more reminds me of the Bernard Goetz situation back in the in the 80s,
Yeah.
whereas a white man got on the subway with a gun and he shot some teenagers, and he tried to make it seem like he was afraid for his life, but it was clearly premeditated, and he actually got off. But here's Matt Getz, another politician from Florida, who's really championing Daniel Penny for some reason. Why, killing somebody is something that Republicans want to rally around. I have no idea, but here goes.
Crazed lunatic appears. He starts threatening violence against your friends, your family, your loved ones, your spouse, your children, even against innocent bystanders. Do you take action? Do you do your duty as a free American? Or do you just sit there like an extra in the movie, watching the violence go down? Well, Marine U.S. patriot Daniel Penny probably asked himself similar questions, and he decided to act. The dangerously insane Jordan Neely walked into Daniel's subway car. He was making violent threats. Daniel bravely put himself in harm's way to subdue Jordan and to put him in a hold until the police arrived. Daniel is even on video providing due care in releasing this person from the hold, even trying to wake him up after he was subdued. Tragically, and in the course of this altercation that could have been avoided, Jordan Neely took his last breath. Maybe you haven't heard of Jordan Neely, but the NYPD has. Jordan Neely has been arrested 42 times. Many such cases involved crimes on the subway. These soft on crime policies like we see in New York kill. It's just a matter of whom in far too many cases. And it shouldn't be the people not committing crimes. If we reopened the asylums and put disturbed and dangerous people like Jordan Neely inside them when they need to be, maybe he'd still be alive today. Maybe there would be some opportunity for a renewed life.
Okay, so this is this guy Matt Gaetz from Republican from Florida, who's clearly trying to make this a political issue, and I don't know, I wasn't on the subway. I have no idea what the video actually shows, but he make it seem like this guy was some type of hero, and he held him until the police came. You could clearly, that guy had to know that Jordan Neely was clearly subdued, and his body had gone limp. So that's murder, in my opinion. And they're trying to play this out in the media, and I think it's a sort of juxtaposition compared to the George Floyd incident where he was murdered by a police officer out in Minneapolis in 2020 amid the presidential elections, and Joe Biden spoke on that, and a lot of the Negro Whispers and a lot of people in the corporate media were making it out to be that this has happened during Trump's era. Trump's not saying anything about it, and kind of tied to Donald Trump and trying to make it like a political issue. And it looks like they're trying to make the killing of Jordan Neely a political issue, that he's some type of threat to people. And it also shows you that the Soros-backed Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg is not good at his job. Jordan Neely should have been institutionalized somehow, and that something is due to the failings of Alvin Bragg, the failings of maybe the mayor of New York, or the failings of the system that he's dead. But the question is, let's be real. There are a lot of homeless people in New York. Who would have thought there wouldn't be homeless people? Again, when you're printing money and giving it to people and they're spiking asset prices and spiking up the real estate prices to make it difficult for people to afford to live, to afford to pay rent, so on and so forth. If this guy, Jordan Neely, had been in a three-piece suit and had a company ID said, random private equity firm, would he have been choked out by Daniel Penny? And so we get all this narrative about he was homeless and he was this, that, and the other. There were a lot of them, but a lot of the hedge fund managers and private equity employees and investment bankers homeless if they hadn't been bailed out in 2008. So that's where this is going, and the Democrats are rallying around this guy. He's raised about $3 million so far. So it's sort of callous to me for this guy to speak like this, but
You mean
I think we should be
Republicans
prepared.
rallying around him?
Yeah, Republicans rallying around this.
You said
Yeah,
Democrats.
I mean, yeah, Republicans, but it ultimately comes down to what are the facts, what's the law, and what does the jury say?
You know, it's that was definitely a loaded clip. You know, framing is a hell of a dog whistle. You know, the first thing that struck out to me was the framing of Daniel Penny as a free American. Unless I missed somewhere in, you know, Jordan Neely's description, I didn't get the impression that he wasn't supposed to be a free American himself. Here's a man who was attacked. Like, that's, even if he didn't kill him, being arrested 40 times, does that all of a sudden mean that because you've been arrested X amount of times, that you no longer have the protection of the law as a free American citizen, like Jordan Neely was? Even if and if so, what is that number? Is it a dozen times? Is it 24 times? Is it 1,000 times? Or is it one time when the handcuffs go on you as an alleged pedophile? Because I do recall, you know, the headlines and some extremely supportive evidence to show that Matt Gaetz himself, just to be clear, that the alleged pedophile. So does the, you know, if you've been, you know, arrested in the same state that one of the largest pedophile rings have been exposed and folks was literally committing suicide, does that mean that, you know, Matt Gaetz shouldn't be afforded the ability to not be physically assaulted? Is that the argument that and I guess the state of Florida is soft on pedophiles, huh? The pedophile ring ran on for what? Better part of 3, 4, 5 decades, as far as we know. With how many whistleblowers that went to law enforcement, and yet the pedophile ring went on, and coincidentally, you have an elected official who had to engage his own judicial rally in order to not get, you know, in prison. For the pedophilia. I mean, it's, you know, I'm just, it's an odd framing, and I'm just asking questions. You know,
right. But I think it looks sort of like tit for tat. Is my impression that it's callous. Let's be clear. But the Democrats and the Negro was politicized George Floyd's murder, and it looks like the Republicans are doing the same thing here. I mean, is what is good for the goose also good for the gander? That seems like the question.
Let's just be clear here. Again, we see this playbook over and over and over again.
I haven't seen this one. I haven't seen this one.
Say it again.
I haven't seen this one in a while. I was a little shocked by it. Maybe
Yeah, I mean,
maybe with the thing with Trayvon Martin. Like I know a lot of I know the media was kind of like parsing through it, but didn't seem like it became like a political issue where politicians were talking about it. I know the corporate media kept talking about it.
right. I mean, the last time that we saw this much attention was George Floyd, right? Um, and the obvious politicizing of what was just straight up murder, um, and how the media tried extremely hard to demonize George Floyd. Well, he was a drug addict. Sure, that may be true. He's been arrested, 200 times. Yep, also true. Well, he should have been off the streets. Sure. Does that absolve him from the protection of the law? Hey, if we are supposed to be a nation of law and order, well, let's be a nation of law and order. The law is not supposed to be applied in a prejudiced manner. Maybe some judges, some legal experts can correct me if my thinking is wrong, but the way the law is uh, positioned is that this is supposed to be an unbiased tool. So simply because you have a certain skin color, simply because you have served in the armed forces, and we can thank you for your service, we can applaud your accolades, and we can also handcuff you and put you in prison for murder. Like,
I'm so lost on this. I'm so lost on this that Daniel Penny is not a police officer. He's not been.
exactly. That's
He's a
that's kind
citizen.
of the point, right? And I think that was your point about bringing up Zimmerman, because here's two private citizens ultimately. Um, both Daniel Penny, Jordan Neely are both private citizens, and that's my point. As a private citizen, and frankly, even if he wasn't an American, even if he was a visitor, once he crossed border patrol, once he came through customs, that is a state sanctioned and approved visitor, which means that if you are within the borders of this country, you have a responsibility to abide by the laws of that nation, but you also equally have to be protected by the laws of that nation. So whether he was a free American or a visiting immigrant, it is immaterial to him having the right not to be assaulted, not to be murdered. Like, that's just, we can dance around it, 50, 11 ways past Sunday. At the end of the day, he was to be afforded the protection of the law, irrespective of his citizenship, irrespective of the amount of times that he's been arrested, whether it was petty crimes, whether it was egregious crimes. There is the juxtaposition of the law between morality and the executing or enforcing of the law itself, right? If someone has committed an egregious crime, can you then commit an action in itself that may be considered egregious? The biggest, I think, the more well-known example is, the homeowner that gets his house broken into, and shoots the thief. All right, maybe the thief had a knife on him. Maybe the thief had an axe or a bat on him, but was shot. And some states recognize that you brought a gun to a knife fight. So as the homeowner, we're going to penalize you, right? And so that kind of gets into that divisive argument of, well, where do we divide morality, kind of ethics, and the interpretation of the law and the enforcement of the law, right? So that concept does exist. But at the same time, when things are clear, this gentleman did not assault anyone, or he didn't physically assault anyone. To my understanding, he was verbally assaulting folks. It wasn't clear that he was targeting anyone in particular. To my understanding, it was an aggressive venting session that, maybe he was experiencing a mental health crisis at the time, dealing with issues, but aggressively, loud, maybe in some folks' faces, and that caused some intimidation. But the question then has to be asked, well, does a verbal assault or feelings of being uncomfortable or intimidated, should that result in a physical assault that then leads to death? So two crimes have happened here. First crime of being physically assaulted, and then the second crime of being murdered.
I think this trial is going to be. Heavily watched. Let me ask you this: we're coming up on an hour, but if doesn't happen in Manhattan and they can't attach Alvin Bragg to it, does it get the same amount of attention from the Republicans? What do you think?
Oh, that's definitely a loaded. I think the backdrop of New York City, at this point, for the better part of 2 decades or so, 2.5 decades, being considered a largely Democratic city, a liberal city. So certainly having that backdrop, right, as fuel to the fire for Republicans to say, and we watched it, with Getz talk about, soft on crime policies, although New York City has I think the second largest police force in the country. I think only second to LA. I could be, I forget who comes first. LA is significantly bigger. I think LA is big enough to fit the entire city of New York in, and still have room for about 5 or 6 more cities.
Right.
So I believe LA has the largest police force. So in spite of stop and frisk taking decades to be ruled as unconstitutional, yet New York City is being deemed as soft on crime. In spite of having a pro-police mayor in office that has bolstered police budget, that has defunded education to do so. New York City is being villainized as, a soft on crime city, somehow. It seems like facts continue to escape these folks. So I don't know that you could have picked a better city. In other words, for Republicans to, take the intellectual leaps over facts to feed a narrative. Here's a little city filled with unfettered crime and violence, in spite of having some of the toughest gun laws in the country, in spite of having the lowest homicide, one of the lowest homicide rates by gun violence of all big cities in the country. In spite of it actually being one of the safest big cities because of its uh, tough on crime policies. Um, it feeds into a narrative. It's
Right,
a
right.
so yeah. I don't think they could have picked a better city. Maybe Portland, maybe Oakland. I think that's the only city that could have provided maybe a little bit better backdrop for Republicans to target.
Right, right. But I think the bigger picture plays into a narrative that I've been saying for years, but people look at me like I'm crazy. I think black people are vulnerable. I think black and poor people are vulnerable. Those who didn't get the bailout money in 2008, if you're homeless, if you didn't go to college, if you are unemployed, a lot more people are going to become unemployed. As the economy turns down. I mean, how much value do you have to this country? Because clearly, the politicians have picked the winners, in my opinion. And clearly, they value certain people over others. They value hedge fund managers and private equity firms and investment bankers and the investor class over others. So, and I think this is a narrative that's going to play out. It's starting to play out now. I think this it brings it to the forefront that it seems like people like Jordan Neely are not valuable to society as others. I mean, I don't see a difference. I don't think Jordan Neely's life is any less valuable than a hedge fund manager's life, but some people do. And I think this brings us to the forefront. I think it's a narrative. I've been yelling this for a while, but I think we're here.
No, I think we've known for a long time that, and we talked about it on here several times, that there's certainly a hierarchy of discarded individuals and discarded groups, because enough of those individuals um, are grouped together, and the individual along with the group that tends to sit on the top of that food chain of those that can be discarded nearly without consequence are black men and black boys. Just I don't know if you came across, I believe it was about 2 days ago. I believe it was Arizona. I might be wrong about my location. 11-year-old black boy calls the police because his parents are fighting, and it begins to get physical. And he's calling to, I believe, to protect the mom. And he makes the call to the dispatch to have the police come out. And yet, this 11-year-old boy ends up getting shot by the very police that he called. No consequence. Now you have an 11-year-old's life who's changed from
Right.
this moving forward. The way that we treat black men and boys in this country. I think one of the things that finally highlighted that in mass, beyond the conversations amongst black men and amongst our own tables and stoops and gatherings, was George Floyd, where we began to see the popularizing of black male death.
Right, exactly.
Um, and in spite of that, right, although the conviction of George Floyd murderers was certainly a win, and it was, it was more of a figurative, and symbolic win, because there is no win for Floyd's family, because that doesn't bring their, their cousin, their uncle, their friend, their brother, doesn't bring them back. Uh, but the point is that Jordan Neely represented every bucket of hierarchy of a discarded class. He was black, he was male, he was homeless, he was suffering from some mental health issues. Every checkbox that he could have checked to say this is an individual that just broadly in society we have proven time and time again we discard. He represented all of it.
And coincidentally, I think, from what I understand, that's what he was complaining about on the subway. He was yelling about he was tired of being unemployed. He was tired of being homeless. He was tired of looking for trying to find where his next meal was coming from. And I don't know why anybody, and I've been yelling about this for a while, I don't know why anybody would think this would not have happened when you print $30 trillion and give it to your donors or somebody you want to sleep with and give it to everybody but black folks and poor people. I don't know why anybody thought this scenario would not play out with Jordan Neely or anybody else. And on the point about black men, on that point about the police and calling the police, so I heard someone call the police for a wellness check on John Morant. He was complaining about, he said bye mom and dad and bye to his daughter or whatever. All he was doing was leaving Instagram. Somebody called the police for a wellness check on John Morant. Why? I have no idea. Why in the world are you calling the police to do a wellness check on a black man? Why don't you just go over there yourself? Somebody thought that was going to end well. And this goofiness. You know what I'm saying? People just don't. I mean, I was like, I was telling somebody, they called the police. I'm the last person that would have called. But anyway, that's why we do this show, because there aren't that many people talking about the economy, and not that many not that many black men talking about something other than rap music or entertainment or some goofiness. And it seems to me the only pathway to get on the corporate media if you're black is you have to be a feminist or a black male feminist, and you have to say something negative about black men. The only time somebody says something about positive about black men is when they die, like Jordan Neely or Walter Scott or George Floyd. And a lot of people wouldn't even give George Floyd a sip of water if he'd asked for it. They saw him on the street. But that's our time. So that's Trump and the GE. Daniel Penny, the subway superhero. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.